Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, this is Sir Spam28 here, bringing you another World of Warships video. In this video, I wanted today to focus on tips, tricks, and general tactics for you to utilize while you're playing World of Warships, just to give you a better chance of winning the match and having, a more enjoyable experience, doing better, earning more credits, earning more XP, and just enjoying yourself in-game better. So the first thing that I want to talk about is right here in the port screen. This is the Tier 1 American cruiser, the Erie, that everyone should have access to. So we're just going to use this for an example. And what I really want to talk about is over here on the right-hand side, just under your ship name and your commander, if you have commanders unlocked. You'll see the general stats of the ship: the survivability, artillery, AA guns, maneuverability, and concealment. Those numbers go from 1 to 100, the bigger number being better, just to kind of give you a general overview of how good your ship is at any given thing. Now, the important thing to note is that these little arrows mean that you can click on them and you can expand these categories, give you more information. So now you can see even more information about your ship, including its hit points, the armor values around the ship, how many guns you have, what size they are, how many AA guns you have and what size they are, your speed, your turning circle, your rudder shift time, which means how long it takes to go from one end to the other, and your concealment, including your surface and air detectability range, aka how close an enemy needs to be to you to see your ship. Now, going one step further, if you take your mouse and hover over any of these categories, you will get even more information, which is very important. So let's take, for example, the armor. If we hover over the armor, we'll get to see exactly what parts of the ship have what kind of armor. So you can see that the forward and aft ends of the ship, only 6 millimeters of armor. That means if you're shooting at an Erie and you're hitting it fore or aft, basically outside of the citadel box in the middle of the ship, you probably want to be firing HE, because any armor piercing, it's got to go straight through and out the other side of 6 millimeters of armor. Citadel, 6 to 8 millimeters of armor. Now, unfortunately, there's no armor viewer yet that I'm aware of for World of Warships, so we can't see exactly where the weak armor is and where the thick armor is. Same with the gun casement, 6 to 63. I'm guessing the 6 is probably on top or behind the gun. And the armored deck is going to be the top of the citadel. So for plunging shots that are coming down, or for dive bombers that are dropping bombs directly on top of the ship, that's how much armor you would need to get through the top of the citadel, the armored deck. That's on top. So that gives you, more information about the armor of the ship. Now, looking at the main battery, the artillery, you can see that this has 4 times single 152 millimeter turrets. So if you hover over that, you get a bunch of information about those specific guns. You get the rate of fire, the time it takes to turn your turret 180 degrees. So if you're looking directly at a port and you want the gun to turn around directly to starboard to face the other side of your ship, it's going to take 20 seconds for that battery to swing around. The maximum dispersion of the gun is how far off target or off the aiming reticle. That's the maximum allowable distance that shell will go off the aiming reticle. So for this gun, it's 99 meters. So that's why, if you're aiming perfectly and you think you've got a perfect shot, you shoot, all your shells go left, go right, go long, go under. That's the dispersion of the gun in effect. So obviously, the smaller the maximum dispersion, the more overall accurate the gun is going to be. Then you have your HE shell, your HE shell damage. Another important stat is your chance to cause a fire per HE shell that hits. And in general, the way this works is the bigger the caliber of gun, the more chance there is of a fire on HE shell hit. I think the Yamato, with his 18-inch cannons, has a 36% chance to cause a fire with each HE shell that explodes. And then you've got your AP shell, your AP shell damage, which as you can see is always going to be more than the HE shell. But that's only if it penetrates but doesn't over-penetrate. So AP shells are a bit tricky. And then also important, you have the firing range of the battery. So that's its effective distance. 9.6 kilometers and below is when you can start shooting at targets with these guns. Mousing over the AA guns, you can see exactly, you've got 4 times 4 28mm batteries. So effectively this ship has 16 AA guns on it, doing their average damage per second, which you can then, look at your aircraft carriers and look at your planes and see what their HP is, what their survivability is, to see how many, seconds it's going to take. You can extrapolate. And then the firing range, which is an important stat for the AA guns, 2.5 kilometers, which means that they can't start shooting down aircraft until those aircraft are within 2.5 kilometers of the ship. Another cool feature, any of these things that have a little camera symbol next to them, like the AA guns, for example, you can click and the camera will zoom right in on that part of the ship. And you've got your maneuverability, which is pretty self-explanatory. Again, speed, turning circle, how maneuverable you are. And then concealment is very important. That's, again, the detectability range, how far away you have to be, or how close you have to be to an enemy ship to be spotted. So this ship's detectability range is 8.3 kilometers. That means that if you're not firing, you need to be within 8.3 kilometers of an enemy ship for that ship to see you. Usually the smaller the ship, the lower the detectability range, which means the more stealthy it is, the closer it can get to the enemy without being spotted. Now, as soon as you start firing your guns, this number goes to hell. You pretty much get spotted much farther away than you normally would if you let your guns stay silent. So knowing this number for whatever ship you're sailing around in lets you, play with the vision, get into advantageous positions unseen before you start firing or before you move in to make your torpedo run or anything like that. So you want to take note of the detectability range of the ship that you're sailing around. For example, if we go ahead and look at the Tier 4 Japanese destroyer that I'm currently sailing around, the Isukaze, you can see its detectability range is 6.1 kilometers. That means that as long as it's not firing, it needs to be within 6.1 kilometers of another ship to be spotted. If you go up here to the torpedoes, you can see that its torpedoes that it carries have an effective range of 7 kilometers, which means it could essentially stay invisible and launch its torpedo spreads. That's not going to be very effective. At 7 kilometers, torpedoes are going to miss everything pretty much all of the time. So you want to close the distance a little bit, but just know that 6.1 kilometers is a pretty short range. Let's say you want to get within 4 kilometers to launch your torpedoes. That's a pretty decent range, and you're going to hit a cruiser, not a cruiser, you're going to hit a carrier or a battleship most of the time at 4 kilometers. You can zoom in from 6.1 kilometers. So you'll be spotted at 6.1 kilometers, zoom into 4 kilometers, launch your torpedoes, and then get back out to 6.1 kilometers and disappear again pretty fast. So especially if you're approaching the side of a battleship that, its guns aren't facing, you're really going to be able to wreak some havoc in that situation. You'll be able to get in, launch your torpedoes, get back out, and become invisible again before it has a chance to swing its batteries around and fire at you. Same thing with a cruiser. Usually you can get in, launch your torpedoes, get back out, get back invisible before a cruiser has a chance to swing its turrets around and fire at you too much. And with a cruiser, especially if you can surprise it like that, your torpedoes are usually enough to sink it in one go. So you want to, take note of your detectability range, especially in the smaller ships, especially in destroyers, and play with that gap between detectability and engagement range to really, exploit what is your primary advantage, your speed and your sneakiness as a destroyer. So that's really kind of what I wanted to go through. Oh, one more thing. Let's take a look at another ship. Let's just go ahead and go. Let's go to the Cleveland, tier 6 American cruiser. It's a good-looking ship. Another thing that I want to talk about is the secondary armament, which if you see up here, if you hover over, it's 6 times 2, so 12. In double turrets of 127 millimeter, which are 5-inch guns. If you click, you can see them. It's these bad boys right here. If you hover over any ship that has secondary armament, you'll see its firing range. The firing range indicates that you have to be within that distance for those secondary guns to start opening up, and they'll do that automatically. Now, there's a way to turn your secondary armament off if you don't want them to shoot automatically. But most of the time, you probably do. And what that means is that you can essentially get a lot more fire on a target if you get within that secondary battery range. I mean, for example, on the Cleveland here, it's got 12 6-inch guns as its primary armament, but it's got 12 5-inch guns as its secondary armament. And, they're a lower caliber, but shooting at soft targets, 5-inch guns will do the job. So if you can get within 4 kilometers and really have that secondary battery start opening up on a soft target, you're going to sink it much faster than just using those 6-inch guns. Again, especially if you're approaching it before it has a chance to swivel its batteries around. Or if it's a destroyer that's already launched its torpedoes, you're in no danger of being torpedoed. You can close. You can start opening up with all of your guns and really, ruin its day in a real quick way. You can also see, if you look at the AA guns on the Cleveland, that the 5-inch guns are listed again. And you can see that those have a 5-kilometer firing range at aircraft. And there is a particular way within the game to force your secondary armament to prioritize aircraft over surface vessels. So if you're providing an aircraft screening role in a cruiser, which tip you should be doing in the early parts of the game, before you're within 4 kilometers of a surface vessel, you can direct your 5-inch guns to start opening up on those aircraft and really ruin their day. 5 kilometers is a long engagement range for aircraft, especially shooting down torpedo bombers, dive bombers. If you're providing a screen for your capital ships, for your battleships, for your carriers, like you should be doing, you should be about 5 kilometers away from your battleship, which means that if a torpedo bomber is coming in, it's going to have to start taking fire from you 5 kilometers away from you, and it's going to have to continue taking AA fire the 5 kilometers that it covers between you and the battleship before it can launch its attack on the battleship. In that amount of time, you should be able to do some significant damage to those aircraft and, even knock down 2 or 3, which greatly helps out your capital ship as far as preventing damage to it and the amount that it has to maneuver to dodge those torpedoes. Every plane you shoot down before it gets to drop a torpedo is another torpedo that your capital ships don't have to dance around. So keep that in mind. And that's really the next thing that I want to be talking about. Going to jump into a game, and we're going to show you a few tricks with the UI, but more importantly, really start to talk about forming task forces, the roles that those ships should be playing within a task force, and how you should be positioning yourselves relative to one another on the battlefield to really maximize your effectiveness and multiply the force that you're able to bring to bear on the enemy, and also reduce the amount of damage that you take from the enemy. All that can be done just through positioning. If you set up your task force or your fleet in the proper manner, you can make it really hard for some of the most powerful things on the enemy team, aka torpedoes, to do damage to your capital ships. And ultimately, when it comes right down to it, if both teams have an equal number of battleships, those battleships are going to be what's deciding the fleet engagement. It's really, because the only thing that is effective, surface to surface at least, at sinking a battleship, if played properly, and screened properly is another battleship. I know that torpedo bombers and destroyers sink a lot of battleships. I play destroyers, I sink a lot of battleships. But that's because they're playing poorly, or more importantly, the cruisers are playing poorly and not screening them. But in an ideal world, ideal team versus each other, the only thing that's really going to be able to dent the battleships are the other battleships. So you want to really make sure that you protect your battleships. And that's what your job as a cruiser is going to be, is screening and protecting your capital ships. But we'll get into that when we get into game. So stick with me. I'll be back in a moment in a game to talk more about those fleet tactics and those task group tactics and where you should be and what you should be doing on the battlefield. Alright, so here we are in game. And if we look at the team list, this team actually has 4 battleships, 4 cruisers, and 4 destroyers. Now what you primarily want to be doing, and I'm in a destroyer, by the way. As a destroyer, what you want to be doing is, in the early parts of the match, you want to be scouting ahead, trying to find the enemy fleet, and then using your smoke screen to choke off, you know, the sight lines between islands to mask what your fleet is doing. And then later in the match, after the battle lines have kind of been established a little bit, is when you want to start forming up wolf packs with the other destroyers and moving in against vulnerable targets to bring your torpedoes to bear. Now, cruisers are what I really see doing the wrong thing all the time, and in this match, they're doing it again. You see our battleships over here, our fleet of 4 battleships. What cruisers want to be doing is setting up a screening force for those battleships. They want to position themselves about 4 to 5 kilometers off the battleships towards the enemy to intercept both planes and destroyers coming in on those battleships. What I often see, and what's happening in this match again, is the cruisers kind of forming up by themselves in their own little group and then going off towards the enemy. Now, if those cruisers, those 3 cruisers there, are sticking together, which is good, but if they run into 1 or 2 enemy battleships, they're all dead, and they won't be able to do a damn thing about it. Meanwhile, our battleships back here are left with no air cover and with no screens against destroyers. So enemy torpedo bombers can fly right over and drop torpedo spreads on these battleships, and sneaky destroyers can shoot straight up the middle and do torpedo runs on these battleships. You know, pop some smoke, dart out, throw some torpedoes, drive back into the smoke, and Bob's your uncle. There's, you know, maybe a couple of our battleships dead right off the bat, all because the cruisers left them behind. Cruisers, please, stick with your battleships. Provide that screen. And battleships, kind of do what these guys did. Please don't just steam ahead right away, you know, ahead of cruisers, ahead of destroyers. So what I'm going to try to do, because our cruisers like left our battleships to hang, I'm going to stick with these guys and see if I can't intercept destroyers or aircraft that are coming in. So there's a fighter wing over there. I'm just, you know, keep scanning the sky for torpedo bombers or dive bombers. And what I am going to do is probably circle around this island and drop a smoke screen on the other side. So we've got a battleship there and a battleship over there behind the island. There's their battleship force. They have 3 battleships, I believe. Yep, and a carrier. We don't have any carriers at all. But sit there. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to shoot this cruiser and prevent him from coming in on my battleships. Now he is going to head and launch torpedoes at that cruiser. So we'll see if we can't nail him a little bit. But I basically want to provide this screening force for my battleships. Now, these ships are getting pretty close. So I'm going to go ahead and smoke once I get in front of this battleship. Just to see if he can't, you know, be concealed a little bit while he's not firing. But once again, we should have cruisers over here to prevent, you know, the destroyers from running in. Like, that's why I was here, to prevent that destroyer from coming in and sinking this battleship. He had, you know, he got spotted by me, so he had to turn and fire his torpedoes at a cruiser, which is not the ideal, you know, target for him to be torpedoing. He wants to torpedo our battleships. But that's why I was there, to spot him before he got into torpedo range of our battleship and prevent him from doing that. Now, a cruiser is not the ideal thing for that. Ideally, or a destroyer rather, is not the ideal thing for that. I don't have the guns to take out another destroyer right away. If he wanted to, he could come in and, you know, withstand my fire for a little bit and get a torpedo salvo off. If I was a cruiser in that position, I actually had a good chance of severely disabling him or sinking him outright in that scenario. Now, we're 3 capped, which is bad, and as you can see, those 3 cruisers that went off on their own are all sunk. What did they accomplish? They ran into a battleship on this enemy flank, or on this other flank where they were, and they got decimated. What were they doing over there all by themselves? They don't have the firepower, they don't have the HP, they don't have the armor to go up against a battleship, even 1 on 3. They just can't. They can't do it. So, cruisers, please, please, please stick with your battleships. Provide screens for your battleships. Don't go off on your own. Now, what I'm going to try to do is sink that, or get a good salvo on that battleship over there. I'm going to use this island as a screen, close the distance to about 4 kilometers, pop out, fire my torpedoes, and then zoom right around the island before he has a chance, you know, to really mess me up with his guns. At the same time, this battleship is facing off against a cruiser and a destroyer. I can't really do anything about that. I can't shoot at a cruiser or at a destroyer. Oh, so this is exactly what a destroyer should be doing, is, you know, providing this screen for the battleship. Unfortunately, he's not doing the greatest job at it. And we're able to get our fish in the water and get the hell out of Dodge before.
Enemy heavily damaged.
So you can see just exactly what a torpedo salvo can do. And now basically I want to get the hell out of Dodge. I'm going to run into an island, which means I'm going to die because I'm talking instead of paying attention. This is me dead. I am dead. That battleship is now going to shoot me. Which means that I am 100% dead. Because you can see how his secondary batteries are opening up on me. So yeah, I am dead. As soon as his primary guns hit me, I'm dead. So that was my fault. I turned into an island because I was talking instead of paying attention. But the point still stands. This video is not about my gameplay. This video is about the tactics and how it utterly failed. Our cruisers went off on their own. Our destroyers went off on their own, and they got decimated. Those 3 cruisers, I think all of them got destroyed by 1 battleship and a cruiser. You can't do that. Cruisers, that's not what you're built for. Cruisers, please, please stick with the battleships. So I'm going to go ahead and exit this match, jump into another match, and we'll talk more about some of the UI stuff, and then, you know, just keep going over tactics a little bit. So stick with me. I'll be back in another match. Hopefully I don't get distracted from talking and play it better than I just did. But you can see how much damage I did to that battleship. So all in all, it's a pretty okay trade of health in this match that we're going to lose anyway. Well, we still have our 4 battleships, which if the enemy is dumb, can lose to. But nope, there's one gone. Because again, as soon as I was gone and stopped providing that screen, that destroyer was able to come in and torpedo that battleship. I should have been a cruiser in this scenario, and I would have been able to, with my guns, kill that destroyer outright as soon as I saw him. But our cruisers were all dead because they, you know, went off and did the wrong thing. Anyway, I'll be right back in another match, talk more about some UI stuff. Alright, so here I am. I'm loading up in a Tier 5 game. I am in the American Tier 3 cruiser, the St. Louis, which is kind of an atypical cruiser in some respects, in that it's big, slow, unmaneuverable, and has limited AA fire. But what it does share with most of the other cruisers is the fact that it has a lot of guns that fire pretty damn quickly, which makes it perfect, absolutely perfect, for taking out destroyers, which again, as a cruiser, is your primary objective. Now, because the St. Louis is so slow, I can't really get ahead of and effectively set up a screen on these battleships right away, but I will travel with them, and once they stop and churn and set up their position, I will then get that, you know, a little bit forward of them to provide that destroyer screen. That's what I want to be doing. That's my primary objective as a cruiser. Stick with the battleships and, you know, screen them. Battleship's primary objective is to be the center of the task group, use their big guns to take out the enemy battleship. Destroyers' primary objectives at the beginning of the game is to get forward, scout the enemy, deny vision with smoke screens, circle back, wait for the battle to develop, and then exploit isolated targets of opportunity and sink them with your torpedoes. Carriers basically just want to be at the back and, you know, providing air cover and harassing the enemy with their bombers. I'm probably going to do another video about aircraft carriers in the future. Probably focusing on the fighter wings and how to use fighter wings to really give your team an advantage. So now you can see it's not a cruiser that's doing it, but it's a destroyer that's up front there that's already spotted that enemy destroyer, which means that enemy destroyer has no way of getting in and torpedoing our battleship without getting destroyed, which is perfect. And that destroyer is also providing an AA screen against those torpedo bombers for that battleship. And you can see those torpedo bombers have already lost 2 planes. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. It would be better if that was a cruiser up there instead of a destroyer. And what the battleships might have done is waited a little bit and waited for me to get up there so I could start screening them better. But that cruiser should be up there. That cruiser should be up there. That cruiser should be up there. Well, that cruiser's actually in a pretty okay position screening that battleship and the carrier back there. But really, that's what you want to be doing. You want to be in a cruiser towards the enemy off of your battleships, just screening away destroyers and aircraft. Because you don't want to leave your battleships isolated. If a battleship is isolated, a destroyer is just going to sneak right in there on it, launch its torpedo salvo, and just decimate it. You saw in that last match, I only got the 1 torpedo salvo off, but it took out 8/10 of that battleship's health. And if I wasn't a dumbass, and if I was paying attention instead of talking, and didn't drive into an island, you know, I probably would have been able to do some work. So now we got this guy stuck against the island. I'm gonna go ahead and churn. What I want to show you here is when you're aiming at something, well, he's dead, but I can do this anyway. When you're aiming at something, if you press Alt, you'll see 2 little things happen below your aiming reticle. You'll get a time and you'll get a distance. That time is the time it's going to take your shells to travel that distance. And the aiming reticle is how far you want to lead your target at that distance. So this says 7.75, which is almost 8. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And if there wasn't a mountain in the way, those shots would be dead on balls accurate. So really use that to your advantage when you're shooting at things. Press Alt, see the estimated lead that is telling you to give the target. Because remember, when you're aiming at something that's moving, your guns start automatically tracking it and moving with it. So the only lead that you have to give it is relative to the distance that's between you two, and that is perfectly calculated automatically when you press Alt. Another thing that's cool is you also get to see when you press Alt where exactly your turrets are facing, what degree they're facing at. I think relative to where you're aiming. Yes, it is relative to where you're aiming. So we got another destroyer coming in, and that destroyer is screening that battleship from that destroyer. And I am very presently going to be screening that battleship from that destroyer, preventing that destroyer from launching its torpedoes effectively against that battleship. So in preparation for that, I'm going to go ahead and churn and get ready when that destroyer comes around that peninsula to just really give him hell if he continues to come. Which it looks like he is. So I'm going to cut speed a little bit so I don't run into that headland right away. Pre-aim, get my distance indicator 4, so we'll put it right about there and just start opening up. see if we can't, you know, effectively hurt him in some way, shape, or form. Now, you saw what happened is that destroyer wasn't able to get as close as he wanted to that battleship to get effective torpedo salvo off. And that was partially due to me and that other destroyer. A, we spotted him early, and B, we were able to start putting fire on him so he couldn't get within that 3 or 4 kilometers of the battleship like he wanted to. And that battleship was then able to churn and dodge all of the enemy torpedoes. Now I'm going to try to dodge this one by backing up and churning to starboard there, and I was able to. And now I'm going to go ahead and go forward and hard to port it to get around that headland, and let's see if we can't, you know, start opening up. Oh, let's see on this guy here. It's just telling me to aim 7, so we'll aim there and see if we can't. Now this ship is so goddamn unmaneuverable that I might be stuck on this headland for a little bit. I'm actually gonna go ahead and full reverse it, and well, we'll continue while we're moving forward. We'll continue turning to port, and then once we get in the negative, we'll go to starboard, and that should get us off the headland. I've got ships shooting at me, which is good. Battleships should be shooting at me and not at... I think he's gonna churn a little too sharply for those. Yeah. So as this battle develops, basically, you know, they have a couple cruisers left, but their destroyer is gone, and that was my primary goal as a cruiser, is to kill destroyers and screen my battleships from destroyers. So my primary objective is complete, which means that all I have left to do is fight it out with surface ships, which unfortunately is not what cruisers are the greatest at. Cruisers shouldn't be fighting battleships, especially this guy's getting really close, so his secondary armament's gonna start opening up on me, which means my days are very, very numbered. Yeah, so what I can basically try to do is just sweep his decks with the HE and see if I can't knock out his guns. I already got a couple, so I'm just gonna continue training on his gun decks, on his you know, his batteries, and then, you know, try to do as much damage as I can with the HE and get the hell out of Dodge here. Now we're focusing on their carrier, so that means that I am gonna go ahead and churn, and that cruiser's out of range. That cruiser is what I can shoot effectively. And these battleships, not for me. Not for me. So I'm gonna try to steam ahead, and you know, see what I can do. These battleships are all coming around, which means that my days are probably fairly numbered. But I think we might have this in the bag. We have 2 carriers. Their carriers should be harassing those battleships at this point. Yeah, and we'll see what we can do. So I'm just, again, continuing to focus on trying to take out his gun batteries with the HE. And you can see that it's working. Unfortunately, I'm never going to be able to sink this guy, and he's actually, I think, trying to ram me. So I'm going to stop, and with what little effort I have left, I'm going to see if I can't shoot this guy. And I loaded AP just because we're really close, just to see if I can't get some Citadel hits. But as soon as his primary batteries are back up, yeah, I'm dead. And the other, I think the other battleship killed me. And unfortunately, we're being capped by a cruiser. And hopefully, our aircraft carrier with, it looks like, you know, our aircraft carriers with all of their torpedo bomber squadrons are able to kill that cruiser that's capping us. And then send their other torpedo bombers towards the battleships that are left. Because once that cruiser's gone, the battleships will be pretty isolated for the torpedo bombers. So let's go ahead and take a look around the match and see what's developing. Looks like our battleships are focusing on their cruisers. And our battleships, unfortunately, kind of made a mistake and beelined for their cruiser, or for their carrier, rather, instead of actually fighting their battleships. Battleships, what you want to be doing is shooting the enemy battleships. That's what you're there for. You have the big guns with the armor-piercing capability to actually get through battleship armor and do significant damage. So please, shoot enemy battleships. Let destroyers get in and sink the enemy carriers with torpedoes. But unfortunately, I think we're about to get capped out because our carriers aren't able to hit that cruiser. Maybe there. Yeah, we reset it. Okay, that's good. So, anyway, primary things to take away from this match is pressing Alt will give you the lead, the travel time, and then lead distance indicator. So use that to maintain accurate fire. And, you know, try to set yourself up to do your primary job. If you're a cruiser, your primary job is to screen your battleships. So stick with your battleships, stay towards the enemy, and keep destroyers and planes away from them. That's your job as a cruiser. If you're a destroyer, scout the enemy, deny vision, wait for the match to develop, move in, sink isolated targets of opportunity. If you're a battleship, stick with your cruisers and engage the enemy surface ships with your guns. If you're a carrier, stick in the back and, you know, provide fighter cover for your battleships and bomb isolated targets of opportunity with your torpedo and dive bombers. And that's the general gist of it. If you keep those things in mind and play your role, you will win a lot more often. Even if it's just you and a single cruiser screening the battleship, preventing a destroyer from sneaking in and sinking a battleship by itself because you're there could be the key to winning the match. It's that simple. Like, I've seen countless times, and I've done it countless times, destroyers coming in and sinking a battleship all by itself because the battleship can't get its turrets around in time, didn't see the destroyer, there was no other surface ship there to screen, and the destroyer just launches its torpedoes, hits the battleship, zooms back out of vision range, reloads its torpedoes, zooms back in, second salvo, battleship sunk. And that will lose you a game, having a battleship sunk like that. Because in the end game, it usually comes down to battleship versus battleship. And if you're down a battleship because the destroyer was able to get unimpeded torpedo run in on it, that's the match. That's the ball game. So even if it's just you by yourself in a cruiser screening planes and destroyers off your battleships, you can make the difference. If you're in a destroyer scouting for your battleships and then doing the reverse, looking for those unscreened battleships and then going in and doing significant damage or sinking it on your own a little later in the match, you can win the game. Battleships, sticking with your cruisers to make sure that you don't get sunk right away by a destroyer or by torpedo bomber squadrons, that can win you the match. Just being aware and playing your role and working together. Just a couple people doing that in the game will make your team much more likely at victory. So I hope this was informative. I hope you guys remember the tips and tricks. Remember to look at the stats of the ships. Remember to look at your concealment range. Play with that vision. Remember to press Alt when you're aiming at something to get the lead that you need right off the bat and start with accurate fire. And please, remember to have situational awareness and tactics and play the role that your ship was designed for. If you're in a destroyer, if you're in a cruiser, don't be zooming right off the bat right away, you know, to go in just to run into a battleship and die. Please play together and play to win and have fun out there. And I hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you guys next time. Thank you.